I signed up for an intergalactic dating show, and now I'm engaged to a warrior queen. Welcome to the world of science. Fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jason Carter never expected his Friday night to end with an interstellar engagement. As far as he was concerned, it was supposed to be a normal evening, filled with cheap beer, questionable takeout, and his friends egging him on to do something stupid. It had started harmlessly enough. A group of guys in a dimly lit apartment, half watching a galactic streaming service. They pirated, laughing at the absurdity of an alien dating show where contestants from different species tried to win the hearts of exotic lovers from across the cosmos. It was all a joke, just something to pass the time, until Mason, his best friend and constant source of bad ideas, pointed at the flashing apply now button on the screen and grinned. "Dude, you have to sign up," Mason had said, nudging Jason's arm with his beer bottle. "Just imagine some blue sky invade with 6 arms might actually like your ugly face." Jason had rolled his eyes, but the idea had taken hold. He was 26, single, and worked a dead-end delivery job that barely paid the bills. His love life had been a disaster for as long as he could remember, and his luck wasn't improving. Maybe just for fun he could apply. Maybe he could even get a free trip off Earth. What were the odds he'd actually get picked? He filled out the application, while the guys cheered him on, answering absurd questions about his preferences, his genetic compatibility, and his willingness to engage in cross-cultural intimacy. He clicked submit and forgot about it until 3 weeks later, when a metallic spherical drone hovered outside his window and blasted a pre-recorded message in 50 different languages. "Congratulations, Jason Carter of Earth. You have been selected as a contestant for Cosmic Love Interspecies Edition. Pack your belongings and prepare for interstellar travel." Jason had barely managed to stammer a response before the drone extended a mechanical arm, injecting something into his neck, and everything went black. When Jason woke up, he was no longer in his apartment. He was lying on a plush metallic surface, his head throbbing, his limbs sluggish. The air smelled faintly of something floral yet metallic, and there was a low hum of energy pulsing beneath him. Slowly he pushed himself upright, squinting against the neon glow of floating holographic screens that surrounded him. "Welcome, Jason Carter," a voice boomed from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You are now aboard the starbound Oasis, home of the galaxy's most beloved dating show. Please remain calm as we prepare you for your grand entrance." Jason's heart pounded as reality set in. This wasn't a joke. He wasn't in his dingy apartment anymore. He had been abducted, no, selected for some insane interstellar reality show. Panic crept up his spine as he tried to stand, only to stumble forward, his muscles still weak from whatever sedative they had used on him. A group of floating drones zipped toward him, scanning his body with beams of light. A metallic voice listed off his vitals: heart rate elevated, blood pressure rising, mild panic detected, administering calming agent. "Wait, would Jason tried to protest, but a mist of something sweet-smelling hid his face, and his racing heart slowed instantly. His muscles relaxed against his will. He took a shaky breath. "Okay, fine. I'm calm. This is fine." One of the drones whirred as it analyzed him. "You are now ready to meet your match. Please proceed to the Grand Arena." "Grand what?" Jason asked, but before he could protest, the floor beneath him shifted. A sudden rush of air roared around him, and then he was moving, being propelled forward through a tunnel of shimmering lights. He barely had time to catch his breath before he was launched out into blinding brightness. The arena was massive, a stadium stretching endlessly in all directions, filled with aliens of every shape, size, and color, all roaring with excitement. Floating screens projected his image in enormous detail, his bewildered expression blown up for the entire galaxy to see. He turned, trying to make sense of his surroundings, but the spectacle was overwhelming. The sky above him wasn't a sky at all. It was an energy dome pulsing with colors beyond the visible spectrum. The air was thick with excitement, charged with the collective energy of the crowd. And then the host appeared, a tall, silver-skinned being with elongated limbs and glowing violet eyes materialized in the center of the stage. They wore an elaborate robe that shimmered like liquid metal, their voice reverberating across the arena with effortless command. "Welcome, honored Viewers to another thrilling season of Cosmic Love, the host announced, eliciting deafening cheers from the audience today. We witnessed the fateful union of two souls drawn together across the vast expanse of the universe. And now, introducing our newest contestant, Jason Carter of Earth. The crowd roared again. Jason could barely process what was happening, his hands clenched into fists. Wait a minute, I never agreed to, and now. The moment we've all been waiting for, the host interrupted, either ignoring or deliberately silencing Jason's protests. Presenting the glorious, the undefeated, the ruler of the Thean Empire, Queen Zira. The entire stadium erupted into a frenzy of cheers, and from the opposite side of the arena, a massive golden gate slid open. Jason's breath caught in his throat. She was enormous, towering at nearly 10 tall. Queen Zela strode forward with the presence of a goddess. Descending from the heavens, her skin was a deep shade of crimson, adorned with intricate golden markings that pulsed faintly like living tattoos. Her long jet black hair was braided with metal rings, and her piercing golden eyes locked onto him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. She was clad in regal armor, ornate, form-fitting, and lined with sharp, gleaming edges that suggested both elegance and lethality. She stopped before him, arms crossed, regarding him as if she were assessing a particularly unimpressive offering. Then, to Jason's horror, she smiled, a slow, predatory grin that sent the audience into another bout of cheers. So she said, her voice deep and commanding, lace with an accent Jason couldn't place, "This is the human who dares to enter my court." Jason swallowed hard. He was fairly certain that he had not dared to do anything of the sorta. Hi, he tried, his voice cracking slightly. The age beamed. And now, as tradition dictates, Queen Zela will formally claim her chosen consort. Jason blinked her. What? Before he could react, Zira stepped forward, grabbed his face with one massive hand, and kissed him. The stadium exploded with noise. Fireworks burst in the artificial sky. Jason's brain short-circuited when she finally pulled away. Her expression was one of satisfaction, though her golden eyes gleamed with mischief. "It is done," she declared. "You are mine now." Jason opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a single coherent thought managed to form. What the hell had he just signed up for? Jason stood frozen, his brain still processing the absurdity of what had just happened. The lingering heat of Queen Zira's lips on his stunned mouth was the least of his concerns. The roar of the crowd, the flashing lights, the overwhelming sense of spectacle, everything around him felt like a fever dream he couldn't wake up from. He had gone from drinking beer in his apartment to standing in a cosmic coliseum, actually engaged to a 10 feet tall alien warrior queen. He stumbled back, barely keeping his balance, as Zira turned to face the host, her expression triumphant, as though she had just claimed a glorious victory in battle. Jason, on the other hand, felt like he had been shoved into a meat grinder. He raised a trembling hand up. "Excuse me. What the hell just happened?" His voice cracked slightly, though he did his best to keep it steady. "I think there's been a massive misunderstanding." The host's glowing violet eyes twinkled with amusement. "Oh dear, contestant, there is no misunderstanding. By the sacred traditions of the Thran Empire, Queen Zela has chosen you as her consort. The binding kiss seals your engagement. An act witnessed by the entire galaxy. Congratulations." Jason's stomach dropped. What? His gaze snapped back to Zira, who was still watching him with an X that could only be described as amused curiosity. No, that can't be right. I signed up for a dating show, not a legally binding marriage agreement. That's insane." Zela arched a brow, clearly unfazed by his outburst. "You entered Cosmic Love," she said, her voice smooth yet laced with the commanding edge of a battle-hardened ruler. "It is a sacred competition where only the strongest, most worthy consorts are chosen to stand at the side of powerful leaders. You were deemed fit to participate, and now you belong to me." Jason's mouth went dry. "Belong to you? That's a little medieval, don't you think?" He ran a hand through his already messy hair, heart pounding as he tried to wrap his head around what she was saying. "Look, you seem unnice, terrifying but nice, but I really think there's been a mistake. I'm just a guy from Earth. I deliver packages for a living. I'm not royal consort material." The crowd, still buzzing with excitement, broke into murmurs, some laughing, others exchanging eager gossip. The host clapped their long silver fingers together, clearly delighted by the unexpected drama. Oh, this is exciting. A human contestant with a rebellious streak, will he fight to prove his worth, or will he crumble under the weight of responsibility? Only time will tell. Jason turned back to Zira, his pulse hammering against his ribs. Listen, there has to be a way out of this, some kind of cancellation policy, a get-out-of-marriage-free card. I didn't even know what I was signing up for. Zella's golden eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable passing over her face. Then, after a tense pause, she let out a quiet chuckle. You wish to reject my claim? She tilted her head, studying him like he was some strange new creature. She had yet to classify that as your right, human. However, there is only one way to nullify our engagement. She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, just enough that the words felt like a blade pressed against his skin. You must prove yourself unworthy in the trials. Jason swallowed. Trials? What kind of trials? The hosts spread their arms, grandly, turning to address the crowd. Ah, yes, the wedding trials. As per threats and tradition, any chosen consort who wishes to reject their claim must prove they are unfit by failing the challenges of honor, strength, and cunning. Should Jason Carter succeed, he will be freed from his engagement, but should he fail, the hosts' eyes gleamed with mischief. The wedding will proceed as planned. Jason felt his stomach do a backflip. That seems like a really unfair system, he muttered under his breath. He could already tell that the word fail was about to become a very real problem for him. Zira crossed her arms over her armored chest, clearly enjoying his predicament. Do you still wish to reject me, Jason Carter of Earth? She asked, her voice laced with amusement, but carrying a weight that made his spine stiffen. Jason hesitated, every fiber of his being screamed at him to take whatever exit was available, but his gut told him that this wasn't going to be simple. If he outright refused to participate, there was no telling what might happen. Would they just throw him out into the cold void of spaceship, him back to Earth? Something told him that the producers of this show weren't the type to let a good story end that easily. Slowly he exhaled. All right, he said, forcing himself to stand straighter. I'll do your damn trials. The stadium erupted into cheers, and Jason immediately regretted his choice. Excellent, the host beamed. Then let the first challenge be announced. A panel on the floor suddenly shifted beneath Jason's feet, and he stumbled back as a section of the arena transformed, massive stone pillars rising from the ground in an intricate pattern. Strange glowing orbs floated between them, pulsing with energy. The host gestured grandly. The first trial, the path of valor. Our contestant must navigate the treacherous pillars, avoiding the energy spheres that will send him plummeting to his doom. Only those with true courage and agility may succeed. Jason groaned. Of course, the first challenge involved heights. He wasn't afraid of heights per se, but he wasn't exactly eager to start leaping across floating death traps. Either he turned to Zira, and you're just going to watch. How the warrior queen smirked, her golden eyes glinting. If you survive, I may even start to respect you. Jason sighed. Great, that's reassuring. With another roar from the crowd, a countdown appeared in the sky above them, marking the seconds before the challenge began. Jason inhaled sharply, shaking out his limbs as he forced his body to prepare for what was sure to be the dumbest thing he had ever attempted. All right, he muttered to himself, survive the trials, get out of the marriage, go home easy, no pressure. As the countdown hit 0, the ground beneath him shifted, and he took his first running step toward the pillar. Ahead, heart pounding, mind screaming, and only one thought truly solidifying in his head: he was so going to die. The countdown hit 0, and the floor beneath Jason's feet surged with kinetic force, launching him toward the first pillar. Before he could fully comprehend what was happening, his instincts took over, legs pumping as he propelled himself forward, arms flailing as he struggled to keep balance. The towering stone pillars were arranged in a spiraling formation, each one just barely close enough to the next to allow a possible, if extremely reckless, sleep. Jason barely had time to register the orbs of shimmering energy floating ominously between the pillars before one of them surged toward him. With blinding speed, he ducked on instinct, feeling the crackling heat pass just inches above his head, and landed hard on the first platform. His knees nearly buckled from the impact, but he forced himself to stay upright. His breath already coming in short gasps, the crowd roared with excitement somewhere. Above, floating screens displayed his every movement in real time, zooming in dramatically on his panicked expression. Jason gritted his teeth. Fantastic, he muttered under his breath, glad to know my suffering is primetime entertainment. Zira stood at the edge of the starting platform, arms crossed, watching him with an expression of mild amusement. She was impossible to read. There was no worry in her gaze, no expectation of failure, just the detached curiosity of someone observing a lesser creature struggle against its own limitations. Jason exhaled sharply and steeled himself. He didn't have time to think about her or the audience or the fact that he was now officially part of the worst reality show in history. He had to move. The next pillar was a solid 10 feet away, a daunting gap made worse by the fact that the orbs of energy continued to drift unpredictably around him. He had no idea what would happen if he touched one, but given the way they crackled ominously with raw power, he was pretty sure he'd rather not find out. He backed up a step, took a deep breath, and launched himself forward. For one horrifying second, he thought he had miscalculated. The gap yawned beneath him, a swirling abyss of nothingness stretching endlessly below. Then his hands slammed against the rough stone surface, his fingers scrabbling for purchase as his legs swung wildly beneath him. With a strangled grunt, he heaved himself up, collapsing onto the second platform in a tangle of limbs. The audience erupted into laughter. Jason groaned, glad you're all enjoying the show. A loud boom sound made him look up just in time to see an energy orb streaking toward him. He threw himself sideways as the crackling sphere slammed into the spot where he had just been, sending up a burst of light that made his hair stand on end. His heart hammered against his ribs. Okay, he muttered to himself, don't stop moving. Got it. The next few jumps were smoother, if still absolutely terrifying. He found a rhythm, dodging the orbs his best he could, relying on quick reflexes and pure adrenaline to keep him from plunging into whatever void awaited below. His body was already aching, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but the end of the challenge was inside a larger golden platform at the center of the spiraling maze. Just a few more leaps, and he'd be there. A triumphant grin began to form on his lips. Maybe he could actually do this. Maybe, just maybe, he could prove he wasn't completely useless. That was when the pillars began to move. Jason's stomach lurched as the stone beneath him trembled, then shifted sideways. The one stable platforms were now gliding unpredictably in all directions, making the gaps between them expand and contract without warning. The orbs of energy adjusted accordingly, weaving between the moving pillars with disturbing precision. Oh, come on, Jason yelled. He didn't have time to think. The platform he was standing on was already drifting away from his next target, forcing him to take a leap before he was fully prepared. His fingers barely caught the edge of the next pillar, and he gritted his teeth, muscles straining as he pulled himself up. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of Zira. For the first time, there was something different in her expression. The amusement had been replaced by something else, interest, curiosity. He didn't know, and he didn't care. He was too busy trying not to die. Another jump, another. The movements of the pillars were erratic, unpredictable, and the orb seemed almost aware of his struggle, adjusting their trajectories. To make his path even harder, he nearly slipped twice, barely managing to keep his footing. His hand scraped raw from catching himself against the rough stone surfaces. His body was screaming in protest, every muscle burning with exertion. But the final platform was clone. Last jump. He gathered every ounce of energy left in his body, steadied himself, and pushed off with everything he had. For a split second, he was weightless, soaring through the air. Then his feet hit the golden platform, and he collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Silence fell over the arena for a fraction of a second. Then the audience exploded into cheers. Jason lay flat on his back, staring up at the artificial sky, his entire body drenched in sweat. He had done it. He had actually done it. A shadow loomed over him. Zira stood at the edge of the platform, looking down at him with an expression that was surprisingly less condescending than before. There was still amusement in her golden eyes, but there was something else now, a flicker of approval. You did not die, she observed, as if mildly surprised by the outcome. Jason groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. Yeah, real proud of myself. Zira extended a hand hesitantly. Jason took it, allowing her to pull him to his feet. Her grip was strong. It felt like she could crush his bones with a single squeeze, but she was surprisingly gentle. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she smirked. Perhaps you are not as weak as you first appeared. Jason exhaled a laugh, shaking his head. High praise coming from the 10 feet tall warrior queen who kidnapped me. She arched a brow. You were not kidnapped. You signed up for this under false pretenses. Jason shot back, gesturing wildly. I thought this was some weird bachelor show, not a life or death gladiator match with forced marriage clauses. Zira chuckled. The sound deep and rich. If you survive the next trials, perhaps you will earn the right to negotiate. Jason groaned. Next trials? You mean there's more? The host reappeared, grinning. Oh, my dear contestant, we are just getting started. Jason dragged a hand down his face. He was going to die here. He was absolutely going to die here. And the worst part, the longer he stood next to Zira, the less certain he was that he wanted to leave. Jason barely had time to catch his breath before the golden platform beneath his feet began shifting. The victorious moment he had allowed himself, that fleeting sense of accomplishment, was gone in an instant as the ground rumbled and the entire arena seemed to reconfigure itself. His stomach lurched as massive stone walls began to rise around him, enclosing the space, shifting into intricate labyrinthine structures with pathways twisting and turning in unpredictable directions. The audience cheered wildly, eager for whatever fresh hell the showrunners had planned for him next. Jason turned sharply, trying to get his bearings, but the golden platform that had been his hard-earned safe haven was already sinking back into the floor, leaving him stranded in the center of a massive shifting maze. His pulse hammered against his ribs as he turned towards Era, who remained on the observation deck of above, looking down at him with an expression that was equal parts intrigue and amusement. Okay, Jason called up to her, hands on his hips, still breathless from the last challenge. Dare I ask what the hell is happening now? The host's voice echoed across the arena, their tone dripping with glee. Ah, excellent. Jason Carter has survived his first trial, but will he have what it takes to prove himself in the next? Welcome to the labyrinth of judgment. Jason winced. Yeah, that sounds bad. The rules are simple, the host continued. The maze is filled with traps, obstacles, and oh yeses, hunters. A murmur of excitement ran through the crowd. Your objective: reach the exit before time runs out. If you fail to escape, well, let's just say you may not get the chance to continue the competition. Jason felt a cold pit form in his stomach. To find Hunter. Zira smirked. You will find out soon enough. Jason swore under his breath. Of course, he thought this was funny. He was just a game piece to her, something to be tested, examined, toy with for her amusement. But the way she watched him, really watched him, sent a strange sensation through his chest. There was interest there, a curiosity she probably didn't even realize she was revealing. She wanted to see what he was capable of. He exhaled sharply. All right, fine, just another nightmare obstacle. Course, no big deal. The walls trembled, shifting once more, and the maze settled into its final form. High above, a shimmering countdown appeared in the air. 5 minutes, that was all he had. The instant the timer began, a loud mechanical clank echoed through the arena, and suddenly the walls around him came alive with movement. Panels slid open with a hiss, revealing sleek insectoid machines that dropped to the ground on spindly metallic limbs. Their glowing red eyes locked onto him with unsettling precision. Great, Jason muttered. Killer robots. Because why not? He didn't wait to see what they could do. Instinct took over, and he sprinted down the first available path, dodging sharp turns and taking random guesses at where to go. The labyrinth twisted unpredictably, walls shifting to create dead ends where none had existed. Seconds before, the air was thick with the mechanical whir of the hunter drones, their clawed appendages scraping against the walls as they pursued him. Jason barely had time to react before one of the machines lunged at him, its sharp metallic limbs slicing through the air where his head had been a moment earlier. He ducked and rolled, coming up just in time to see another drone drop from above, its mandibles clicking menacingly. Without thinking, he grabbed a loose chunk of stone from the floor and hurled it at the thing's glowing eye. The impact sent sparks flying, and the drone reeled back, giving him just enough time to bolt in the opposite direction. He was already winded, his muscles still aching from the last trial, but he didn't slow down. The walls kept shifting, forcing him to change direction at the last second, making it nearly impossible to get a sense of where the exit might be. He could hear the drones closing in behind him, the hum of their energy cores growing louder. Jason spotted an opening. A narrow passage just wide enough for him to squeeze through, and dove for it, scraping his shoulder against the rough stone as he forced himself forward. The moment he emerged on the other side, the wall slammed shut behind him, cutting off his pursuers. He barked out, panting, "Suck it, murder bots." His victory was short-lived. The ground beneath him suddenly shifted, and he realized far too late that he had stepped onto a trap. A deep rumble vibrated beneath his feet, and before he could react, the entire floor collapsed. He plummeted. Wind roared in his ears as he tumbled downward, his limbs flailing. Panic surged through him as he braced for impact, but instead of slamming into cold stone, he landed with a heavy splash. The shock of ice-cold liquid enveloped him, knocking the breath from his lungs. Jason thrashed, disoriented in the darkness. The water was thick, almost gel-like, clinging to his limbs, making it harder to move. His head broke the surface, and he gasped for air, coughing as he tried to take in his surroundings. The pit was deep, the walls smooth and impossibly high above. He could see the faint glow of the arena lights, but there was no ladder, no obvious way out, just the water, and the sense that something was moving beneath it. Then he saw them, dark shapes gliding just below the surface, long, sinuous forms barely visible in the murky depths. Jason's stomach twisted. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." A ripple in the water to his left, another to his right. Whatever was down here wasn't mechanical, it was alive. A deep guttural growl rumbled through the chamber, and Jason barely had time to react before something massive surged toward him, its scales catching the faint light. He twisted to the side, kicking hard, barely avoiding the razor sharp teeth that snapped shut just inches from his arm. "Nope, no thank you," he yelped, frantically swimming toward the nearest wall. The creature circled back. Jason could feel the pressure shift in the water as it moved, a predator toying with its prey. He kicked harder, trying to find some kind of handhold on the slick stone, but there was nothing. Then, just as the thing lunged again, a new sound cut through the chaos, a sharp, commanding voice from above. Enough, the water killed. The creature hesitated. Jason, chest heaving, turned his gaze upward. Zella stood at the edge of the pit, her expression unreadable, but her gold eyes gleamed with something dangerously close to amusement. "You struggle well, Jason Carter," she said, tilting her head slightly, "but you are not yet worthy." Jason let out a breathless, humorless laugh. "Great, now what?" Zira smirked, and with a flick of her wrist, a section of the wall shifted, revealing a way out. Jason swam toward it without hesitation, dragging himself onto solid ground. Dripping and exhausted, he glared up at her, shaking water from his hair. "You could have done that earlier," he accused. She shrugged. "Where would the fun be in that?" Jason groaned, rubbing a hand down his face. "I am going to die here." Zira simply smiled. "Not if you prove yourself human." Jason exhaled sharply. He wasn't sure what frustrated him more, the trials, the fact that he was still alive, or the growing realization that despite everything, a part of him didn't want to fail. Jason sat on the cold stone floor, still drenched in whatever bizarre gelatinous liquid had filled the pit, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. His limbs felt like dead weight, exhaustion seeping into every inch of his body, but he forced himself to stay upright, to keep his head from lolling back onto the damp ground. He had survived again, barely, and he was starting to wonder just how many times he could scrape by before his luck finally ran out. Above him, Zela remained, perched on her elevated observation platform, looking down with that infuriating mix of amusement and curiosity, her golden eyes glowing faintly under the artificial lights of the arena. She was unreadable, but Jason could feel something shifting in the way she regarded him now. The condescension had lessened, if only slightly. He couldn't tell if that was a good sign, or if it just meant she was starting to enjoy the spectacle of watching him suffer. Jason dragged a hand down his face, smearing away excess water, and exhaled sharply. "Okay," he said, voice rough from exertion. "Are we done yet, or do I get to fight some kind of space hydra next?" Zira smirked. "You mock but your progress is surprising." She stepped forward. And even from this distance, Jason could feel the weight of her presence, the sheer command in the way she moved. "You are still standing. Most who attempt the labyrinth of judgment do not make it past the first phase." Jason let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, good so. I've lasted longer than the usual doomed schmucks. That makes me feel so much better." The host's voice chimed in, far too gleeful for Jason's liking. "And yet the trials are not over." "Oh no," for Jason Carter. To truly prove his worth, he must complete one final challenge. Jason groaned, letting his head fall back against the stone with a dull thud. "Of course, there's another one." The crowd erupted into cheers, and the arena began shifting again, the walls rearranging themselves, the platforms rising and falling as a new section took shape. Before Jason's weary eyes, he forced himself up, muscles screaming in protest, and took a wary step forward. The new challenge looked too simple, a single narrow bridge stretching across a seemingly bottomless chasm. On the other side, an ornate pedestal held what looked like an intricately designed metal ring. It gleamed under the lights, its surface etched with unfamiliar symbols, pulsing faintly as if infused with energy. Jason frowned. "Let me guess, I have to get that thing without falling to my death." The host chuckled. "Oh, but of course. And naturally, there is a catch." Naturally, Jason barely had time to process what that might mean before the bridge trembled beneath him. A heartbeat later, pillars of flame erupted from the edges, looking dangerously close to the narrow path. "Oh, come on," he yelled, staggering back as the heat washed over him. Zaret chuckled, and Jason glared up at her. "You enjoy this, don't you?" She tilted her head slightly. "It is entertaining." Jason groaned. "You're so lucky." You're hot. A flicker of something passed over her expression, amusement, interest. But before Jason could try to decipher it, the bridge shifted again, tilting ever so slightly to the side. Jason muttered a string of curses under his breath and took a cautious step forward. The bridge was barely wide enough for him to plant his feet side by side, and with the flames shooting up in unpredictable bursts, it felt like walking across a tight RPP while being shot at. He took another step, then another, trying to tune out the roaring crowd, the pulsing energy of the ring ahead, the heat searing against his skin, one foot in front of the other. "Don't stop, don't look down." Another burst of fire shot up just inches from his arm, and he instinctively jerked back. His balance wavered, his foot slipping dangerously close to the edge. His heart lurched into his throat as he teetered for a sickening moment, windmilling his arms wildly before he managed to right himself. "Focus, human." Zira called from the other side, her voice sharper now, no longer just amused but carrying something else, something almost like instruction. John grit his teeth. "Yeah, thanks for the great advice. Super helpful." He took another step, then another, muscles taut, breath coming fast. The heat was unbearable, sweat dripping down his face, but he kept moving, forcing himself forward. Finally, he reached the pedestal. The ring was warm to the touch, vibrating faintly against his fingers as he lifted it. The moment he did, the flames died down, and the bridge solidified beneath him. Jason let out a shaky breath. "Oh, that's never a good sign." The crowd roared in approval, and Jason turned, ring clutched in one hand, as he made his way back across. Without the flames it was easier, but his legs felt like jelly, every inch of him aching, drained from the relentless trials. When he finally stepped on the solid ground again, he nearly collapsed. Zila was waiting. She extended a hand much like she had before. But this time Jason hesitated. There was something different in the way she was looking at him. Still assessing, still scrutinizing, but with something else layered beneath it, approval. Jason reached out and clasped her hand. Her grip was strong, warm, firm, grounding in a way he hadn't expected. "You were not without skill," she said, tilting her head, golden eyes locking onto his with unsettling intensity. "Perhaps you are not as fragile as you seem." Jason huffed out a laugh, still breathless. "Wow, the highest of compliments. I feel so special." Zilla smirked, but didn't let go of his hand immediately. Jason wasn't sure if it was intentional, but for a brief moment there was a charge between them, something tense and electric, something that made his exhaustion feel secondary to the awareness crawling over his skin. Then, just as quickly as it had settled, she released him, stepping back with her usual air of effortless authority. "You have passed the trials, she announced, turning to the audience. The engagement stands. Jason blinked. Wait, what? That's it? I win and I still have to marry you. The host let out a delighted laugh. Oh, Jason Carter, did you think victory would mean escape? No, no, no. By proving yourself, you have confirmed that you are worthy of Queen Zira's hand. Jason ran both hands down his face. I hate this show. Zira smirked. You fought well, Jason Carter. You should be proud. He looked up at her, at the way she was still watching him, at the way her words, while spoken with the same confidence as before, felt just a little different now. And to his horror he realized a very small, very stupid part of him was proud. This was bad. This was very bad. Jason didn't sleep that night, not because the luxurious chamber they had thrown him into was uncomfortable. On the contrary, it was absurdly extravagant, lined with soft alien silks and shimmering iridescent fabrics that made his earthly concept of wealth seem downright primitive. The walls of the room pulsed with gentle light, responding to his presence in ways that should have been soothing, but nothing about his situation allowed for relaxation. No, Jason didn't sleep because his brain refused to shut off. He was engaged to an alien queen, not just any alien queen, but Zira, a towering golden-eyed warrior who had gone from seeing him as a joke to something closer to an actual competitor. He had survived the trials, and instead of earning his freedom, he had somehow solidified his status as her chosen consort. The absurdity of it all gnawed at him. How had his life gone from late-night pizza deliveries and argue with his landlord about rent to this? A month ago, he was worried about car payments. Now he had an entire empire watching his every move, waiting to see if he would either thrive or be crushed under the weight of expectations he had never agreed to. He sat up, running a hand through his hair, staring at the strange glowing ceiling. Above him, the events of the day replayed over and over in his head. The deadly labyrinth, the ridiculous flame bridge, the way Xela had looked at him afterward, that flicker of something beneath her usually impalpable expression. Not quite amusement, not quite condescension, respect. Jason let out a groan and flopped back against the absurdly soft bed. This was dangerous. He had sworn up and down that his only goal was survival, that he had no intention of actually playing along with this insane reality show's premise, but something about the way Xelera had started to acknowledge him, the way she had tested him and found him worthy, was stirring something inside him that he really didn't want to examine too closely. A chime echoed through the room, breaking him from his thoughts. Jason sat up quickly, wary. A panel on the far wall slid open, revealing a small hovering drone with a tray of what he assumed was food. Great, Jason muttered. Room service in my royal prison. The drone flew toward him, placing the tray on a nearby table before beeping pleasantly and retreating. Jason eyed the food suspiciously. Various alien delicacies. He couldn't begin to identify some of them, glowing in ways that felt deeply unnatural. He was about to poke at something that looked suspiciously like a jellyfish when the door to his chamber slid open with a soft hiss. Zila entered without hesitation, moving with that effortless confidence that made her presence impossible to ignore. She was no longer in her ceremonial armor, but in a flowing dark red garment that draped over her powerful frame, giving her an almost regal casualness. Her golden eyes fixed on him, unreadable as always. Jason instinctively sat up straighter. So do I get a honeymoon itinerary now, or are you here to tell me about the next deathmatch? I need to win before I get to breathe properly. Zira smirked slightly but didn't take the bait. Instead, she strode toward the table, glancing at the untouched food before flicking her gaze back to him. You have not eaten. Jason folded his arms. Forgive me for being a little paranoid. I've been thrown into pits, chased by murder drones, and forced to do parkour over lava. I figured poison was the next logical step. Zira chuckled, a rich, smooth sound that sent an unwelcome shiver down Jason's spine. If I wished to kill you, Jason Carter, you would not be here now. Comforting, Jason muttered, reluctantly reaching for a piece of what looked like bread. It smelled vaguely of honey and spice, which was good enough for him. Zira sat across from him, watching as he took a hesitant bite. The bread was surprisingly good, and before he knew it, he was taking another. You have done well, she said after a moment, her tone shifting to something more measured. Few outsiders have faced the trials and lived, even fewer have earned my acknowledgement. Jason swallowed, narrowing his eyes at her. Right about that, still not sure what that means. What exactly am I to you now? Because I'm pretty sure you didn't sign up to marry a human delivery guy from Earth when this whole thing started. Zira tilted her head slightly, studying him as though she was still trying to decipher a particularly perplexing puzzle. I expected nothing from this competition. She admitted it was a political necessity, a gesture to appease the factions within my empire who demand tradition be upheld. Jason blinked. Wait. You didn't even want to do this? Zella's gaze remained steady. I had no expectation of finding a worthy consort. She leaned forward slightly, her presence impossible to ignore. And yet here you are. Jason felt a strange tension settle in the air between them. He swallowed, trying to ignore the way her golden eyes seemed to bore into him, trying to pretend that the heat rising in his chest was an actual attraction. He leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk. So what? I'm a happy accident, a cosmic fluke. Zira considered him for a long moment. Perhaps, but you are not weak. You are not what I expected, and that interests me. Jason let out a slow breath. You really know how to flatter a guy. Zella smirked again, but it was different this time. Not just amusement, but something more genuine. Do not mistake my interest for mercy. You are my consort now. Jason Cartered, you must prove yourself worthy of remain at my side. Others will challenge you. Some will seek to remove you. Jason tensed. Oh, fantastic. So I get to be the target of assassination attempts and reality television drama. Zira stood, moving toward the exit. You will adapt or you will fall. She paused at the doorway, glancing back at him. I do not tolerate weakness, but I do recognize potential. Do not disappoint me. And with that she was gone. Jason sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. He should have been furious. He should have been planning his escape, finding any way out of this madness. But instead he found himself thinking about the way Xela had looked at him, and worse, about how much he wanted to prove her right. Jason had barely started processing his situation when the first assassination attempt happened. It wasn't dramatic. No poisoned jails or masked assassins waiting in the shadows with daggers. No, this was far more subtle. Subtle enough that if he hadn't already been operating under a low-grade panic at all times, he might have missed it entirely. It started with his second meal aboard Zell's royal ship. He had barely gotten used to the idea of being treated like someone important before a tray of food was presented to him once again by an eerily silent servant. The meal looked identical to the one from the night before. Some kind of seared protein, a side of soft spiced grains, and a dark blue fruit that smelled faintly of citrus. It smelled good, and after everything he was starving. Jason had lifted the fork, ready to dig in, when something tingled at the back of his mind. A small nagging thought. Why was it silent? The previous meals had been delivered with some level of fanfare. The drones whirred with their usual efficiency. The servants moved with a stiff, almost rehearsed precision that came with serving royalty. And there had always been a faint hum of background noise, the distant sound of machinery or murmured conversation. But this time there was nothing, no sound. Jason glanced up sharply and caught the servant's eyes, dark, focused, watching him too closely. He glanced back at the food, and something cold slithered down his spine. He wasn't an expert in assassination, but he was a guy who had worked in fast food long enough to know when something had been tampered with an easy, practiced motion. Jason let the fork slip from his hand. It clattered loudly to the floor, and in that same moment he knocked his drink over with his elbow, spilling the deep amber liquid across the table. The servant flinched. Just slight, but it was enough. Jason looked up, locking eyes with them, and said casually, "Hey, can you grab me another drink?" The servant hesitated too long, and that was all Jason needed before the servant could react. Jason kicked the edge of the table, sending the tray and its contents crashing to the floor. The second the food hit the ground, the once appetizing meal reacted violently to the spilled drink, sizzling and hissing in a way that no food ever should. For one horrifying second, the spilled meal melted into a sickly black sludge, the fumes curling upward in thin, shimmering waves. Jason jerked back, his pulse slamming against his ribs. The servant bolted. Jason lunged after them, but they were fast sprinting toward the nearest exit with a fluidity that suggested they weren't just a normal Staff member, he scrambled up from his seat and gave chase, his legs still aching from the previous trials. But fueled now by adrenaline and pure rage, this wasn't a joke anymore. It wasn't a dumb reality show with absurd challenges and dramatic declarations. Someone had just tried to kill them, the servant. Tassin, whoever was heading toward the docking bay, and Jason was gaining on them. He didn't think, just acted with a burst of energy. He threw himself forward, tackling the would-be murderer to the ground. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs. But he didn't let go. He locked his arm around their shoulders, struggling to keep hold as they thrashed, violently trying to shake him off. They were stronger than they looked, but Jason had spent years wrestling with heavy delivery crates, and he wasn't letting go. A sharp crack rang through the hallway as the assassin's elbow connected with his ribs, sending a bolt of pain through his side. Jason gritted his teeth, refusing to loosen his grip. "Who sent you?" he snarled, digging his knee into their back to keep them from riding free. "Was it one of the contestants? Someone who wants me gone?" The assassin said nothing, only struggling harder. Jason's grip tightened.